Hey guys, it's Ellen Brock, freelance editor. This week we've been talking about story structure. Yesterday I covered the midpoint, and the day before I talked about the first plot point. And today I'm going to talk about the second plot point. The second plot point is probably the simplest of all of the plot points in terms of what it needs to do, but oftentimes being simple doesn't necessarily make it any easier to understand how it might play out in your novel. So I'm going to try to make it as clear as possible in this video. The second plot point occurs at the 75% mark at the break between the third quarter and the fourth quarter. So the main thing that you want to look at for your second plot point is some sort of information or event that gives the protagonist sort of the last piece of information they need to defeat the antagonistic force. Another way to look at this second plot point is that it forces the protagonist towards the climax. So it's almost the entry into the climax of the novel. It doesn't necessarily mean that the protagonist moves straight into the climax, but it gives the protagonist a piece of information or new stakes or something that clarifies what they need to do in order to succeed. The key to creating a really satisfying climax to your novel starts with the second plot point. It's important that in the fourth quarter, most of the pieces should already be in play. So the protagonist shouldn't gain new information or new allies or new skills that are vital to conquering the antagonistic force. So in other words, your protagonist should be capable of solving the problem, capable of achieving their goal or defeating the antagonist at the point that they go into the fourth quarter. That doesn't mean that they're just going to easily walk up to the antagonist, defeat them, and then move on and achieve their goal. It doesn't mean that it's simple. It just means that the protagonist has all of the pieces of the puzzle in place. They have all of the skills that they need. They have all of the allies that they'll need. So they can take all of that into the climax and succeed. Because the second plot point introduces the last piece of vital information or the last event that pushes the protagonist towards the climax, certain genres can have more difficulty filling out the fourth quarter. And this is why often in horror or fantasy or sci-fi or especially action, the protagonist will discover what they need to do, and then a whole quarter of the novel will go by and it will be a series of mini battles and larger battles, and eventually they will get to the antagonistic force and have the final climactic showdown. So the reason that you'll see that structure very, very common in action movies is because the writer doesn't want to introduce new information because that would disrupt the structure. And so they need to make it take a long time to get from that last piece of information, that clear identification of what the protagonist needs to achieve, all the way to the climax. They want to fill that space, but they don't want to disrupt the structure by introducing new characters or new concepts or new skills. So the main challenge that people have when writing the second plot point is that they introduce it too late because they have this sense of, well, this last piece of information that my character needs, if I give it to them now, the story is pretty much over because the character is going to move from getting this information directly to defeating the antagonist. So the main problem that occurs is the second plot point actually doesn't fall near the 75% mark. It falls more like at the 90% mark, and this can really disrupt the structure of the novel and the pacing, and it just helps the reader to feel more satisfied with the ending when there is a larger gap between this last piece of information and the climactic showdown. A common way to handle the second plot point that tends to work pretty well is that it introduces the protagonist to what they need to do, but then in the fourth quarter there's a lot of trials and there's a lot of effort that needs to go into achieving whatever needs to be achieved. So for example, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone is a really good example of this because it's so blatant in the movie as well as in the book. So Harry and his friends, they learn about the Sorcerer's Stone. They learn from Hagrid that he accidentally revealed a secret, and now they know exactly what they need to do. They need to go get the Sorcerer's Stone. But it's not a simple objective. They don't simply walk up to the stone, pick it up, and leave. There are a lot of trials, and those challenges that they face on the way to getting the stone connect back to things that they've learned throughout the novel. So the skills they've picked up, and as well as the allies that Harry has picked up with Ron and Hermione, become relevant, and they are useful to Harry in this climax, which really gives the reader the sense that all of these things that led to this point were important because they're all coming together to solve the problem. And those trials and those challenges that lead up to getting the Sorcerer's Stone help to stretch out that space between getting that key piece of information, we need to go get the Sorcerer's Stone, to actually achieving the goal during the climax. Ideally, the second plot point should also create this sense of momentum, this sense that the novel is speeding up, and that's another way to indicate to the reader what the pacing is, to indicate that that the character is moving towards the climax. The reader wants to feel that sense at the second plot point that the story is speeding forward and that the climax now is inevitable. The character is definitely going to end up in this final showdown. The key to writing a great second plot point is that it needs to set up the character, the protagonist, to move towards the climax. The protagonist will have been moving towards the climax prior to this point, but for the first time, the protagonist will have a strong idea of what they need to do. It will be a final reveal of information or a final event that will push the protagonist towards the climax, that will tell the protagonist, this is what you need to do, this is how you're going to solve the problem. So I hope this video gave you a better idea of what should happen at the second plot point. Tomorrow I'm going to be talking about the climax, so I hope that you will come back to watch that video. I just want to thank everybody who has shared my videos and all of my new subscribers. It really means a lot to me that the channel is growing, and after I get through the novel bootcamp videos, I am going to try to get a more regular schedule, so I hope that you guys will subscribe and like and share my videos because it really helps me out. Thanks, guys.